The corpse was heavy. He wasn't a big man, neither fat nor muscular, yet in death he seemed heavier. It took 3 of them to haul him down to the fields, and all their effort to heave him over the railing and into the pink-grey sea below. He didn't splash, the meat was too viscous and dense for that. His arrival produced naught but a wet slap.
"Oh, for fuck's sake, is he not going to sink? I thought he was going to sink. You said he was going to sink."
"Give it time. Just watch." They watched. It was slow at first, the body easing itself through the greasy layers. Then, as the surface tension was broken, as the meat parted beneath it, there was a sound not unlike someone sucking gelatin through a straw, and the body vanished.
"How long do you reckon it'll take?"
"Few hours. By the time the farmers show up tomorrow, there won't be enough left for anyone to identify, and that's assuming they find it before the week is out."
"Is anyone else hungry?"
There was an awkward silence. Then laughter.
"You're a freak, you know that?"
The men nudged and jostled one another, grinning as they strolled away from their sinking worries. Far below, the meat accepted their offering and began to feast. Many of the flesh fields were still automated, mechanical limbs speeding through the gloom, spraying the vats with nutrients, lifting crops and depositing fresh stem stock, all with the minimum of human input. But the machines were ancient, and nothing lasted forever. Gradually, year by year, more of the flesh farming industry was losing its automation. Software was often the root of the problem. They could repair and replace components, but sooner or later the changing nature of the machine would collide violently with its untouched, unmodified software, code like mystical runes written in languages nobody could remember. Accidents would happen. In the summer of the year of the flame 1027, a loading machine spontaneously forgot the existence of its load. It dropped a fully laden vat on 3 men, crushing them beneath the weight of both metal and meat. 1 week later, another man lost his arm when a mechanized guillotine failed to identify an obstruction and set about deftly slicing the crop ready for harvest. These were not isolated incidents. The farmers were bleeding on their fields of flesh, and yet in spite of this, their bodies were outnumbered. Plantation by plantation, company by company, automation was being retired, first as a result of technical failure and injury, then in anticipation of it. And as once machine-dominated roles were handed back to the humans, human nature ensured that the transition would never be easy. Traditionally, the fields were tended to by the Corks, the core kin, they of pale skin and dark eyes, who lived quietly in half-hidden communities down in the deeper tunnels, having done so since the earliest days. The ways of the Corkin were older than the ancient plantation machines, while the people of the leanings and the upper streets had grown accustomed to the knowledge that life existed beyond the city, that it had grown numerous and cheap. The Corks still lived as if humanity were in danger of vanishing, as if they were the only humans left. They wasted nothing, valued life, and taught their children that contribution was continuity, that mankind would only survive if it earned that right. Reserved, reasonable, frugal, and patient, the Cork population was unsurprisingly low. Thus, with automation of the fields waning, new farmers were needed, and most of them were recruited from the dappled sunlight of the leanings high above. Such new recruits had spent most of their lives with the reassuring cycle of day and night, artificial though it may have been. They were unaccustomed to the perpetual darkness of the plantation caverns. When the first team of new recruits was trained on the Fairbanks plantation that year, half of them promptly developed insomnia and, over time, vitamin deficiency, while several became so emotionally unstable they were dangerous to work with. Some of the men told stories of otherwise cheerful and benign colleagues who had started beating their wives and children in fits of sleep-deprived madness. Then, of course, there was the incident with Frederick Harris. "I do believe I got some Fred in my lunch today." Gallows humor. Big laughs all around. Frederick Harris was another victim of the fields. Mistakenly believing that drink would help him sleep, he wandered the plantation late one night, lost in an amber haze. He slipped, cracked his head, fell into a vat and drowned in the meat, unconscious and unnoticed. By the time his body was found, the meat had fed upon the corpse like any other source of nutrients. Frederick Harris became part of the meat. The whole vat had to be emptied, for its crop could no longer pass DNA standards for the human content threshold. The men who tended that particular grid lost a month's pay, such was the value of the crop, and Frederick Harris was doomed to be remembered with bitterness. He was not alone. Organized crime in the city had long since learned a valuable lesson about the meat farming industry, that the meat did not merely dissolve and absorb organic matter, it merged with that matter. It reassembled as it consumed, turning the corpse into more of itself. Thus, even if a body hadn't dissolved fully before it was recovered, contamination from the meat meant that DNA testing of the corpse would never stand up in court. It was perfect. Dumping a body in the vats meant erasing a person, turning them quite literally into raw meat. Or, as they had come to be known, sandwich men. This was what the farmers called them, so numerous were the bodies that the horror of their discovery was worn down into a grim joke. It became an inevitability of the farming process and part of the daily routine to walk the gantries inspecting the greasy grey-pink fields for the telltale signs of a sandwich man, a stray shoe, perhaps, or a subtle indentation left by a recent fall, or a hand protruding from that sea of meat as if pitifully waving for assistance. At midday on the 16th of August, Samuel Knott strolled across the fields, performing said inspection, and with keen eyes scanned the glistening surfaces of the vats for said signs. It wasn't his grid, but he'd been working the fields for nearly 20 years, and felt responsible for the plantation as a whole. Not that management had ever seen fit to match his pay or status to this responsibility. He didn't mind. Until lately the pay had been steady, and that was what mattered. Sam knew he was never destined for greatness. He knew he would never be remembered by history. But he had a wife and 2 children, and he had dutifully provided for them without fail or complaint. Until lately. Until the bodies began appearing in greater numbers. Until management, without spending so much as an extra penny on security, decided that their policy would focus on human error. Namely, the mistaken diligence of the farmers whenever they dredged up a corpse and correctly forced management to dump the meat by filing the proper paperwork. The message was clear. Whosoever pulls a sandwich man from his crop shall forfeit the value of that crop in pay. This was not official, nor even strictly legal, but it was understood. Management truly believed that its deniability was plausible, that the Fairbanks plantation, wholly owned subsidiary of the great Fairbanks shareholder family, was not responsible for the contamination of crops by unauthorized organic incursion, but was simultaneously dedicated to its adherence to all anti-cannibalism regulations within the meat farming industry. So it was with bitter disappointment that Samuel Knott came to lean against the railing, peer over the gantry at the vat below, and set eyes upon the human form spread-eagled in the meat. And though he had seen so many sandwich men as to render his stomach ironclad and his dreams blissfully free of death, fate saw fit to grant him that which all sensible men dread. Something new. A shadow fell upon him. "Sam?"
"Yeah?"
What is that?" Sam stroked his beard and frowned. He averted his gaze, looking out across the fields. The crop glimmered wetly beneath the lamps and spotlights. The other farmers moved over it, among it. Some of them walked the gantries, checking the vats, supervising the decreasingly trustworthy machines, while others waded through the crop itself, spraying a nutrient cocktail from long hoses. Above it all, blackness. Black rock lost in perpetual gloom.
"That'd be a corpse, mate,"
said Sam. "Oh, are you sure?"
"Pretty sure, yeah."
Nobody else had seen it yet. This was a blessing. In the past, Sam had been honest to a fault, but Sam was no fool. He was not so set in his ways that he could not see how things were changing. And in that moment, in that instant, as the events of the previous week were replayed in his mind, he knew what he had to do. "Oh," said the man beside him. An awkward silence followed. Then, "You know what Eckert's going to say?" Sam nodded wearily.
"Yeah, I know what Eckert's going to say."
"He'll go on about striking again, or something. If they take our pay, he'll go on about striking, and then we will all be in the shits."
"In the shit? Yeah, probably."
Sam looked down at the vat once more, and allowed himself a private shudder of revulsion.
But then again, he might say nothing.
That'd be a first.
Yeah, well, so is this.
There was no face. There were eyes, there were nostrils, a mouth, ears even, but somehow there was no face, as if the brain refused to process it as such. The eyes were milky white, staring straight up as if enthralled by something that lay beyond the realms of human sight. The mouth was open, a silent howl, toothless and tongueless. The body looked like an accidental fold of the meat itself, a trick of the light, just as smooth, with the same grey-pink complexion. The shape could have been male, but then it could have been female. There was nothing to identify it in this regard. Tendrils of the meat were draped over the body, and tendrils of the body were draped over the meat. It was hard to tell one from another, such was the ongoing conversion process. But as repulsive as this featureless, degenerate mockery of the human form was, its appearance was not that which bothered Sam the most. What bothered him more was the fact that it was lying there on the surface of the crop. It couldn't have been dumped there during the day when the fields were teeming with activity. The gangsters were bold, but they weren't stupid. Presumably the body had been in there all morning, all night, longer perhaps, given its appearance, and yet not only was it failing to sink, but Sam knew for a fact that it had risen, for he had patrolled this gantry earlier that day and had seen no sign of sandwich men. "You know what don't happen," murmured Sam. "No? Bodies that rise. Bodies that don't sink. That don't happen. 20 years I've been working these fields. You know how many bodies I've seen not sinking?" "None?" "None," said Sam with a firm nod. "They always sink. They always sink. This one ain't sinking. Look at it. Just look at it." "Yeah, they always sink," said the man beside him, whose name was Gunther and who was trying very hard not to look at it. "And where are the clothes? Meat doesn't normally eat the clothes." Sam shrugged and stepped back from the railing. "Well, they probably stripped the poor bugger before they tossed him in. Wouldn't be unheard of. Rare, I'll grant you. Normally they don't bother, but not unheard of." "Yeah, not unheard of," said Gunther. Gunther was a Cork, and he was a good man. He was one of the old crew. Sam had trained him 10 years earlier, and had in turn been trained by Gunther's father before that, as one of the first non-Corks on the plantation. They were practically family. Like the rest of his people, Gunther had the kind of pallor that glowed in the stark, artificial lighting of the plantation. His eyes were dark, pale irises, but with such large pupils you couldn't really tell. He squinted a lot, for the light level had been increased lately to accommodate the new recruits from higher up in the city. This had been a source of some consternation among the Corks, but they were too polite and reasonable to complain openly, so took to wearing wide-brimmed hats to shield their eyes. The new boys sneered at this, ridiculing the hats as if they were some sort of Cork cultural statement. "Do me a favour," said Sam. "Sure," said Gunther, without hesitation. "Head on over to Warehouse B, find Eckert. He'll be having his lunch, so he'll be grumpy as anything, but try to keep it quiet." "Oh, quiet. Eckert?" "Yeah, I know. Just, let's not make a big thing out of this. If management hears of it, we'll be out of options, and if I know Eckert, he'll appreciate options." "Didn't realize we had any to offer him. You know, I could always get some of the Corks to—" "It's Eckert's grid. You know him. If we don't tell him first, there'll be trouble, especially if we tell the Corks before him and his boys." "I suppose so." Gunther dutifully stomped away along the creaking gantry. Sam watched him disappear into an opening in the far wall of the cavern. High above it, the windows of the admin offices glowed, silhouettes drifting back and forth, never lingering. When Gunther returned with Richard Eckert and his entourage, Eckert looked predictably angry, and Gunther looked predictably cowed. Eckert was often angry. He was just that kind of man, sharp nose, sharp tongue, short fuse, all stubble and sinew with shadowed and twitchy eyes. He wasn't necessarily a bad person, just a bit of an arsehole. He'd been working the fields for a couple of years now, used to be a dangler before he dislocated his left shoulder, couldn't ride the lines with a weak shoulder, they wouldn't let him, so him being an arsehole, well, it was understandable, up to a point. He didn't want to work here. He just had no choice, mouths to feed and so on. Due to his forthright nature, he was the closest thing to a union boss they had, though the flesh farmers had no union. The new boys in particular seemed to like him. He didn't bother to hide his contempt for them. This garnered him a reputation for honesty, and merely served to render them even more loyal. "All right, old man, let's fucking see it," growled Eckert as he came marching towards Sam, rolling up his sleeves and striding so heavily that the gantry rattled loudly with every step. The men behind him were mimicking their leader's mood, frowning and mumbling with discontent. They'd all been on their lunch break, and interrupting a man's lunch break was taking a fucking liberty, they all agreed. Then Eckert reached Sam, and Sam pointed, and Eckert peered over the railing. His entourage, waiting for some further outburst they could rally around, became visibly uneasy as their fearless leader stood there in silence. "Told you it was strange," said Gunther, quietly vindicated. "Well, shit," said Eckert distantly. "The Cork was right. Never seen that before." "Yep," Sam yawned. "Riser too, not just floating." "Yeah?" "Yeah. Came this way earlier, nothing.
Came by just now and there it was.
Huh. And the face.
Yep. How do you want to handle this?
Eckert glanced sideways at Sam.
Does management know? Depends on how loudly you were shouting.
Eckert gave this some thought.
Pretty loudly, he admitted. But I don't think I was coherent enough for anyone to twig.
He wasn't, said Gunther. It was mostly one word.
Right, said Eckert.
Well, I'll tell you right now, they can't know about this.
Yeah, I figured you'd say that.
Eckert gave Sam an urgent look and took him aside. Speaking low and earnestly, he said, I just can't afford to lose a month's pay. I really can't. Not this month. Understand? Sam saw the stress in his eyes. He'd heard something vague about health problems from one of Eckert's boys. Could have been the wife or the kid. Could have been both. And I know you. I know you don't like me. I know we don't see eye to eye, so I know you wouldn't have bothered telling me this unless you had something figured out already. So if you've got a plan, you tell me right now, and I will owe you. That's what you're after, right, old man? Sam looked around, checking that nobody else was watching them too intently. Eckert's boys were gossiping away, oblivious. It probably hadn't even occurred to them, as Gunther stood awkwardly nearby, that he was the cork they'd beaten up a couple of months earlier.
Get some chains, said Sam.
Chains?
Sam nodded at the floater. Just a couple, but make 'em heavy. Sooner or later, before the day's out, someone will come walking through this grid. We can't deal with this now. Not with everyone around. Get me some chains.
Right. Fine. Then what? Sam glanced up at the pipes and cables following the tracks and scaffolding overhead.
Then, nothing. We can't do anything until later. I assume you can stay late tonight?
I'll stay all fucking night if I have to.
Can you grab a couple of volunteers?
Not a problem.
Good. Then get me those chains. I'll keep watch.
Eckert sent 2 of his men. They scurried off to one of the warehouses adjacent to the plantation cavern, and promptly returned, walking briskly and carrying the chains like a couple of men trying very hard not to be seen to be walking briskly whilst carrying chains. Offering them to Eckert, Eckert in turn offered them to Sam. Sam took them one by one and casually tossed them over the railing. "What the fuck are you?" Eckert began. "Oh," he quickly concluded, as each chain thudded softly upon the meat, across the sandwich man, and with the softest squelching dragged the body into the depths. The white eyes were the last thing to go under. "Out of sight, out of mind," said Sam, symbolically dusting off his hands. "Yeah, for now. In the meantime, I'll rustle up a few volunteers. Meet us in the packing halls after work, and you can fill us in on the rest." With that, Eckert and his minions departed, and Sam was left feeling just a little guilty. "You don't have to help out," he told Gunther, who was now glaring for all he was worth at the backs of Eckert's men. "I heard what Eckert said," he replied, "that he'd owe you." Sam nodded.
"He tends to keep his word with that sort of thing, and he makes sure that his boys will too."
Gunther's scarred lip twitched briefly. "Then I'll make sure he owes me." Sam spent the whole afternoon worrying that the chains might slide off, but mercifully the body stayed submerged and nobody else had seen him throw the chains in. While inorganic debris wasn't usually a problem from the point of view of contamination, metallic debris in particular could damage equipment, and the farmers were vigilant of anything that might cost them. 5 o'clock came and went, and Sam watched the other farmers finish up for the day, checking the chemical balance on their crops, hosing down their equipment, and departing in dribs and drabs. He saw Eckert and a couple of his men step through the plastic veil leading to the packing halls, and nodded to Gunther. Along misty refrigerated aisles they walked together, past the stacks of boxed-up meat awaiting shipping to the processing plants. At the far end of the warehouse, light swept across a loading bay, and the ground trembled with the passing of a cargo tram. "Evening, old man," said Eckert, announcing his presence. He was loitering in an alcove nearby, smoking. His 2 minions stood either side of him, trying very hard to look intimidating, without looking like they were trying very hard. "This here's Higgers, and that's Ulf." Higgers was a broad-shouldered man with a broken nose. Ulf was a ratty little figure with tattooed arms. The 2 men gave casual nods to Sam, and ignored Gunther. "These idiots gonna be enough?" Eckert asked.
"Should be."
"So what's the plan?" Sam cupped his hands together and breathed a little warmth back into them.
"We hang around here until we're sure everyone's gone. Then someone grabs a hammer, heads out to the vat, gives the pipes a bit of a nudge."
"How much of a nudge are we talking here?"
"Enough that next time the pumps are triggered there'll be a corrosive leak that'll just happen to sour that crop."
Eckert frowned. "Are you taking the piss? It'll have to be dumped. That's no fucking good to us."
"Yes, it'll have to be dumped, But they won't take it out of our pay if it's a burst pipe, and the maintenance crews won't worry about whether or not it was done on purpose. They're not paid enough for that. Their paperwork will back ours up. That's important. We gotta camouflage this in proper procedure.
Oh, right. Fair enough.
And so we're all very clear on this, said Sam, folding his arms. Retrieving the Sandwich Man isn't enough. Whatever happens, whether we bugger this up or not, that vat can't go to harvest. I'll not have my kids eat corpse because we got lazy. Are we clear?
Yeah, wouldn't dream of it. So what are the rest of us doing while someone nudges them pipes?
Well, we'll be grabbing the equipment we need to deal with the Sandwich Man. We'll need a crane, trolley, some waders, maybe a couple of billhooks and so on. And we'll need to move it all quickly and quietly. Preferably have someone on lookout.
Got it.
Everyone clear?
Eckert turned to his men.
Yeah, grunted Higgers.
Yup, replied Ulf.
Right, let's give it, say, an hour or so, then we'll get started.
The plantation cavern was quiet at night. Quiet in the way that large cities were quiet in the early hours of the morning. You could feel the life all around, slumbering. You could sense the things that were always there, never noticed during the day. You could hear the soft rumble of machinery in other caves nearby, the deeper vibrations of the tram tunnels, the constant hissing and occasional clinking of the pipes. Every now and then one of the vats would glug and gurgle to itself as bubbles of gas climbed slowly through the marble layers of maturing meat. The gantries that crossed the fields were lit up, as always, with little lamps on stalks. Like gleaming eyes, the windows of the admin offices were still aglow high up on the back wall of the cavern, but the only silhouettes were those of cleaning staff, and they knew well not to interfere when they saw men out on the fields at night. Eckert himself volunteered for the hammer job, and Sam had to admit the man could be subtle when he wanted to. The damage looked pretty innocuous, but it was just enough to have the pipe leak when the pumps were turned on come the morning. When that happened, the crop would be sprayed with the corrosives that would normally use to clean vats after harvest, and regulations stipulated that the whole crop be dumped for fear of toxicity in the final product. All that remained was to deal with the body. Ulf stood watch, or rather crouched nearby like some feral beast waiting to pounce, scanning the plantation entrances for activity. With a small crane positioned and secured upon the gantry, the rest of them hurriedly donned their waders and braced themselves for the unpleasant task ahead. Climbing over the railing, they plunged into the meat, right up to the waist, and waded through that dense and slippery mass, probing it with foot and hook. Higgers found the chains, and thus the first body. But before they could even converge on it and prepare to dredge it up, Eckert suddenly staggered backwards, flailing his arms with surprise and nearly sliding and slumping into the sucking depths. Fuck, he gasped, his coarse whisper echoing across the relative stillness of the cavern. What's wrong? Stood on a fucking hand. That's a fucking hand or nothing. Sol's fucking blood. The other men looked around. It couldn't have been the floater's hand, for it was too far away. It was another body, and they soon discovered that it was not alone. 2 more were promptly found when the men spread out and searched the vat more extensively. There were 4 bodies in all, 4 bodies in one vat. It was unheard of. This is a slow maturation crop, mused Sam, trying to wrap his head around it as they wrapped straps around the first body and hauled its naked, unnaturally pink form into the air. I bet that's why they dumped him here. What do you mean? Asked Gunther. They knew this vat wouldn't be harvested for a while. Which means some fucker, one of ours, sold them the field schedules, snarled Eckert. Sam shrugged. Probably one of the boys who lost their pay last time. That's how it goes, in circles. Fucking pricks. Who? Our boys or theirs? Both. Everyone. Fucking pricks, the lot of them. One by one, they hauled the other bodies up onto the gantry, sodden clothes stripping chunks of meat all the way. None of the others were like the first. They all looked like regular sandwich men. In addition to the clothing, they looked like they'd been down there a while, a couple of days by Sam's estimation, and bone was visible in places where the meat had eroded and converted the flesh, grinning skull faces and skeletal limbs adorned with fresh pink matter. No blood. Blood was always the first thing to be fully converted. It was more easily broken down than skin or muscle. And that was somehow the worst thing about it. The unnatural freshness of such corpses, the lack of blood or rot. Until it was harvested and processed, the meat was alive in a rudimentary sense, and all the things they pumped into it to keep it growing, well, they acted together like a sort of immune system. Nothing rotted in the vats. It couldn't. Only the meat could eat. all bacteria suppressed or destroyed outright, and people were often surprised and unsettled by the distinct lack of any stench. The fields only ever smelled of bleach, with a vaguely metallic hint of the meat itself. For this was not a dead place. This was a place of constant rebirth. Month to month the fields of meat were grown and harvested and grown again, fields of bloodless, inanimate life. Heaping the bodies onto a loading trolley, they wheeled their deathly freight off to the cold air of the packing halls and laid the corpses side by side upon a plastic sheet on the floor. The place was quiet and dark, and in the minds of those men it took on the otherworldly qualities of a tomb.
"I've never seen such a thing,"
said Sam. "Of course you fucking haven't," snapped Eckert. "Nobody has." The regular sandwich men grinned their toothy grins, their teeth bleached clean by the vat. The anomaly, the floater, the riser, it still looked strange. It looked like it had been in there long enough for most of the mass to have been converted to meat, but that meat hadn't fallen from the bone, not even when it was manhandled out of the vat and onto the trolley. It was an intact body, made of vat meat. There were even stray tendrils of fresh growth still reaching out in slimy little curls. "It's like it's—" Gunther trailed off, what little colour he had rapidly draining from his pale skin. Nearby, another cargo tram rumbled past the warehouse, the mist aglow with its passing lights. "Yeah," said Higgers, fidgeting. "Like it's what?" "I don't know. Can we close the eyes?" "Well, I'm not fucking touching it, I'll tell you that," said Eckert. Sam gritted his teeth, stooped over that unnaturally pink body, and with a gloved hand gently closed the eyelids over those ghostly white eyes. The mouth was still agape, but he sure as hell wasn't touching that. "Thanks," Gunther began to say. Even as Sam stood up, the eyelids eased open again, pink flesh sliding smoothly over white orbs, and all 5 men took such a sudden step back that they nearly fell over. "What the fuck was that?" "Quiet!" Sam hissed. Then he took a breath and let it out with a sigh. "Just relax. Everyone relax. It's just reflex or elasticity or something." Eckert shook his head, giving a little hysterical laugh of disbelief. Then he sniffed and straightened up. "Whatever. We got things to do. We got to go take the equipment back, make sure nothing's missing come the morning. Maybe stir the vat a little so it don't look like we were stomping around in it all night." "We're just going to leave them here," said Gunther, staring at the bodies, horrified. "Nobody wants to steal our fucking dead people if that's what you're worried about. What if someone comes down here and—" "Who? Who the fuck would come down to the packing halls at this time of night?" Sam was not a superstitious man, but he had always been wary of jinxing himself, so he decided to err on the side of Gunther's caution lest some badly paid security guard decide to break with years of traditional indifference and bribes and actually start patrolling down here at night. "Well, one of us should stay here, keep watch," he suggested. "Ulf," Eckert volunteered. Ulf took a step back. "I'm not staying in here on my own." "Oh, for fuck's sake, you're afraid of the sandwich men? They're dead, you tosser." Ulf looked embarrassed, but he dug his heels in. "It is what it is," he sulked. "Besides, it's right bloody cold in here." "Oh, and you want someone to cuddle with, keep you warm? Soul's fucking mercy." Eckert whistled through his teeth. "Fine. Higgers." "Bugger that," said Higgers. "Get the damn cork to do it. He's pale as a corpse already, should feel right at home." Everyone turned to Gunther. Gunther, somewhat bolstered by their cowardice, nodded to Sam. "I'll do it," he said. Then he looked Higgers and Ulf in the eye, one by one. "They're just dead bodies," he said grimly. Eckert slapped him on the back. "Thank fuck someone has a pair on 'em," he said. "Now can we get the fuck on with this, or would you ladies like to go powder your noses first?" Sam and Eckert quietly unbolted the crane, while Higgers gathered the chains and billhooks and heaped up their soggy waders. Cleanup took longer than expected, cautious as they were. At one point Sam heard footsteps approaching along one of the tunnels, and everyone hunkered down, scarcely daring to breathe. But whoever it was turned away before they reached the plantation. By the time they returned to the packing halls, it was nearly 9 o'clock. They found Gunther standing by the entrance just outside, arms folded tightly and a haunted look on his face. Eckert's patience quickly ran out. "Oh, what now?" he demanded, striding up to Gunther. "Why are you out here, and where's Ulf?" "I don't know," said Gunther. "You don't know?" Sam shouldered Eckert aside. "What's wrong? What happened?" Gunther shrugged. "I don't know where Ulf is. He wandered off." "Wandered?" "He ran." Eckert closed his eyes and visibly restrained some sort of internal combustion happening in his brain. And why did that flaccid prick run away, exactly? A soft breeze lifted the plastic sheeting that veiled the doorway, and Gunther glanced at it with apprehension. Sam saw the hairs stand up on the man's neck, goosebumps all down his arms. Said Gunther. It blinked. What? It just looked like it blinked, that's all. Probably a trick of the light or something, but we both saw it, and Ulf took off. "Ah!" cried Eckert, venting his frustration by kicking a pipe and nearly dislodging it. The combined sound carried far, and was then swallowed up in silence as the men stood waiting for a response that never came. Sam breathed a sigh of relief. "Are you done?" Eckert scowled. "It's fine. We don't need Ulf anymore, and the bodies are still there, right?" Gunther shrugged. "I don't see why they wouldn't be." Eckert stormed off through the doorway, batting the plastic aside. "Are you coming?" he demanded. Sam and Gunther followed, with Higgers trailing behind. The bodies, as it turned out, were indeed exactly where they'd left them. Perhaps it was just the fear on Gunther's face toying with Sam's imagination, but he'd half expected to find one of them missing. Nevertheless, it wasn't exactly a welcoming sight. "Well, that's different," he observed numbly, moments before his own hairs stood on end and a shiver ran down his spine. The naked mass of the sandwich man in the middle, the floater, had spread. The outline of its body was intact, but the excess, the tendrils of raw meat, had crept outwards and were curling across the packing sheet, reaching for the other two bodies, drawn to a source of nutrients by some cellular consensus, like slime mold. "That's fucking disgusting," said Eckert very softly, as if fearful that the dead thing might hear and take offense. "It's still growing," Gunther observed. Sam took a moment, then nodded to himself. "Well, of course it is. It's vat meat. Just 'cause you take it out of the vat don't mean it stops growing, right? We never killed it, right? We plucked it right out of the vat. Of course it's still growing. We never told it to stop. We never anti-spiked it before we took it out. That's probably what you saw when you thought it blinked. Just growth, right, Gunther?" "Yeah, right," said Gunther. "That's right. We never anti-spiked. Stands to reason it'd be a bit lively." Higgers let out a brief and desperate laugh, and gave Gunther a friendly nudge. Gunther stared at him. Sam nodded firmly. "Yeah, I mean, it's just meat. It's disgusting, but it's raw meat, right?" "Right," said Eckert distantly. "Right," said Sam, breathing a sigh of relief. "Let's wrap 'em up, get 'em to the trash lock or something. You know where the nearest one is?" Eckert suddenly frowned and shook his head. "Nearest one is 2 levels up, but we can't take them there. I thought you had a fucking plan for this, old man. You know how tight they are now. Can't even get a broken fucking chair burned without the right paperwork and an inspection. Can't we bribe? You think any of us has that kind of money? You think the fucking gangs would be dumping their fucking corpses in our fucking fields if it was that cheap to get stuff burned? Everything gets logged now. You know how it is. Shit, Sam. I thought you had a fucking plan." The men stood in silence. Eckert was right. Sam knew how it was. Years back, the city's security division had realized how many bodies were disappearing as a result of liberal trash lock incineration. Now, rubbish disposal was one of the most bureaucratic and secure industries in the megalith. If they turned up at a trash lock without a very hefty bribe and fraudulent documentation, their mysterious, suspiciously body-shaped heap would be scrutinized, and they'd probably be suspected of murder. The reality of the situation began to land on all of them with great weight. Higgers' big blunt face began to crease with worry. "What the fuck do we do now? You said this would clear it all up, Eck. What the fuck do we do?" "Shut up," growled Eckert. "I'm thinking." "I don't know," admitted Sam. "I thought something would come to me before we got this far. Can't even dump 'em in the waste trench. Bones would just jam the machinery. Then we'd be in even deeper shit." Gunther stirred beside them. "I think," he said. They all looked at him. "Yeah? You think?" "I think I know a place." "Trash lock?" "No, it's a big hole in the ground. Abandoned place, you know. Hole goes deep. Stuff falls down that. It's gone for good." "You're talking about the lower tunnels," said Sam. "Yeah, I mean, it's not exactly safe, but what else can we do?" Eckert grunted with resignation. "Well, they do say you sneaky fuckers know your way around them tunnels, right?" "Right," said Gunther. Eckert shrugged at Sam. "Well, if your pet cork reckons he has a plan, fuck it, let's do it." With that, they shrugged off their horrified stupor and descended upon the corpses, rolling all 4 of them up in the packing sheet and, with a lot of effort and a number of expletives, hauled the misshapen quasi-living bundle of death onto one of the trolleys they normally used to transport slabs of meat. The opaque blue material was a godsend. Things were much easier when they couldn't see that non-face staring back at them. Following Gunther's instructions, they grabbed a couple of lamps, then trundled the trolley back into the plantation cavern, across the fields and over to the freight lift on the far side. Standing together in awkward silence while the lift descended, Sam heard the quiet rustling of plastic and saw something pinkish-red dribble and drip onto the floor. He didn't react to it, didn't want to draw everyone's attention to it. The sandwich man was still growing, and Sam really didn't want to dwell on the fact that in their haste they'd bundled him up with a source of food. It, he corrected himself. Just an it, not a him, not anymore. It didn't matter. It was just meat. Just meat. They rode the lift to an old warehouse area 3 levels down. The place was used to store spare and broken machinery, the kind of things that were too heavy to bother stealing. Abandoned hydraulic limbs and dead engines loomed out of the sprawling darkness like the dismembered remnants of giants. Moving in a puddle of weak lamplight, the farmers trundled their unwanted crop through the cold expanse, dripping all the way, wheels squeaking with every turn. "It's over here," Gunther declared, pointing to a deeper shadow set into the far wall, an opening. "It slopes down. Be ready." It did slope down. They had to turn the trolley around and brace their backs against it, all 4 of them, shuffling steadily lest the bodies slide right off. Whenever their feet scuffed and slipped against the dusty, rocky ground, whenever Eckert hurled insults at an unjust universe, the sounds bounced away into the seemingly endless gloom below, reminding them all of the depths that lay ahead. For the city was founded in these depths long ago. It was said that there were streets and homes and marvels lost in the blackness. Nobody came down here but the Corks. Getting lost in these deep places meant a slow death. But true to his heritage, Gunther seemed to know where he was going, and was not afraid of the suffocating darkness. "Take a right," he announced, just as Sam was giving up hope of ever reaching the bottom. The tunnel levelled out at a junction. After taking a minute to nurse their aching backs and catch their breath, they wheeled the trolley along a mercifully flat yet oppressively narrow passage, until it opened up onto what Sam assumed was probably an old factory or power plant. Huge machines towered over the farmers, their nature and purpose lost beneath centuries of corrosion. There were lots of places like this, it was said, and sometimes you could even hear the rhythmic thunder of ancient technology still labouring away in the blackness. The rocky ground gave way just up ahead to metal grating, and then the metal grating gave way to emptiness. From the abyssal depths the echo of dripping water. "This is it," said Gunther, as if it weren't obvious. "Good," said Sam. "Good. This is good. This'll work." "Yeah," said Higgers with uncertainty, peering into the gloom. "Let's get this done. This place is giving me the fucking creeps." "Everything gives you the fucking creeps," muttered Eckert. Together, revitalized by the realization that their dreadful task's end was in sight, they pushed the trolley forward. The incessant squeaking of its wheels bounced off unseen walls in the darkness ahead, returning to them as a shrill cry so discordant it sent shivers down their spines. They cringed, but kept pushing. Then, as they neared the precipice, one of the wheels promptly slipped into a gap in the warped grating, lodging itself there firmly. Even as Sam grabbed desperately at the greasy, slippery corner of the packing sheet, the contents were carried forward by momentum and gravity. All 3 bodies lurched to freedom and lay there in a crumpled heap, right in the middle of the chamber. All 4 men stepped back in revulsion. "Oh, fucking hell," boomed Eckert, giving the trolley a vengeful kick. "They couldn't possibly have fallen into the fucking pit, now could they? Fuck's sake." Without warning, Higgers suddenly turned and ran blindly back towards the tunnels. "Wait!" cried Gunther. "You don't have any light! You'll get lost!" Sam wasn't really paying attention. He was staring at the bodies, at the very same thing that Higgers had fled from. For amid the soft glow of the lamps, surrounded by deep shadow, entwined in the limbs of the other corpses, the sandwich man stared back at him, stared through him, its living yet inanimate eyes of pure white, blinked, slowly. "Fucking hell," murmured Sam, holding a lamp aloft. Eckert said nothing. He was just standing there, frozen. What's wrong?" asked Gunther. Sam fought back his rising terror. Maybe it was just the shadows. Maybe... No. It blinked again. "Fucking hell." Tangled in its feasting tendrils, the pink body-shaped mass was beginning to turn just a little grey, and in the yellow lamplight it was looking less and less like glistening raw meat, and more like sweating skin. Eckert moved at last. With the grunt of words strangled by fear, he stepped away, stumbling backwards over the trolley. He landed hard on the metal grating, dropping his lamp. It smashed and went out. Beside him, Gunther had gone very still and deathly silent. "Fucking hell," whispered Sam, his throat tightening with fright. The sandwich man blinked very slowly, and the yawning, silently howling mouth moved. Inside, Sam could see a tongue that hadn't been there before, flicking slowly against rounded proto-teeth. "I think," Sam mumbled, and then paused. The sandwich man's mouth had moved again, then promptly stopped. "I think it's—" The mouth moved once more. "Oh, fucking hell," mumbled Sam, backing away, legs wobbling, shadows flickering as the lamp trembled with its owner. "Oh, God, I think it's—" The sandwich man mimicked Sam's final word in silence, its blank eyes blinking faster. Sam panicked and dropped his lamp. It smashed, plunging all of them into darkness. And from that darkness, they heard a moan.